30 years ago, 33 people were killed in bomb attacks in Dublin and Monaghan. It was the worst single day in the history of the show. No one has ever been charged. These are secretly shot pictures of men who are alleged in an Irish government report to have been members of a gang that was involved. The report concludes that the security forces in Northern Ireland had good intelligence to suggest who was responsible shortly after the attacks. It says it's likely that this farm in County Armagh played a significant role in the bombings. Allegations in the report claim the men were part of an RUC, UDR and UVAF gang that went on to commit a series of murders in Northern Ireland. Tonight, Spotlight examines those allegations. We ask, did the security forces know about the gang and could they have been stopped? Many of the allegations are made by this man, John Weir. He's a former RUC sergeant, a convicted murderer and self-confessed member of the gang. Spotlight has found other evidence that appears to support the allegations in the report.
There was people who were drivers, there was people who were able to take people's lives, shoot people. There was people who simply operated at an intelligence level.
The judge who conducted the inquiry was told the British government had 68,000 files of potentially relevant information, but he was sent just 16 pages. Last week, Bertie Ahern said he found it hard to believe there wasn't more information available. The families of those allegedly killed by members of the gang are demanding answers.
My father was an Englishman who came to live here. His government should be able to tell us, his family, what actually happened to him and why people weren't prosecuted.
This farm in Glenanne in the rolling hills of South Armagh is where John Weir was based. He told the Barron report that the gang carried out a series of murders on both sides of the border for several years after the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. Weir told the inquiry that while not every gang member was involved in each of the attacks, the farm at Glenanne was at the heart of its activities, and he claims the intelligence services knew about it.
Things would have been planned there because it was a safe house in every respect of the word, you know. That house was always watched, special branch, military intelligence even went to the house, you know. So it wasn't as if it was a secret house or anything, because basically everybody knew what was going on from there. You know, and of course they knew. But the military intelligence people probably were in the house more often than I was in the house.
And John O'Leary gets the ball from the rebound, is shot, and it is a goal!
Dublin, the 24th of August, 1975. Thousands of GAA fans from Northern Ireland were in Croke Park to cheer on. 30 years ago, 33 people were killed in bomb attacks in Dublin and Monaghan. It was the worst single day in the history of the show. No one has ever been charged. These are secretly shot pictures of men who are alleged in an Irish government report to have been members of a gang that was involved. The report concludes that the security forces in Northern Ireland had good intelligence to suggest who was responsible shortly after the attacks. It says it's likely that this farm in County Armagh played a significant role in the bombings. Allegations in the report claim the men were part of an RUC, UDR and UVAF gang that went on to commit a series of murders in Northern Ireland. Tonight, Spotlight examines those allegations. We ask, did the security forces know about the gang and could they have been stopped? Many of the allegations are made by this man, John Weir. He's a former RUC sergeant, a convicted murderer and self-confessed member of the gang. Spotlight has found other evidence that appears to support the allegations in the report.
There was people who were drivers, there was people who were able to take people's lives, shoot people. There was people who simply operated at an intelligence level.
The judge who conducted the inquiry was told the British government had 68,000 files of potentially relevant information, but he was sent just 16 pages. Last week, Bertie Ahern said he found it hard to believe there wasn't more information available. Minutes later, Bridget and Hugh Scullion and two friends turned into the road.
I saw a body lying out on the road. I drove on down a wee bit and then we thought that we should go back and maybe either lift the man. We thought it was a drunk man. We could hear the boys saying that he had gunshot wounds.
He's still warm. We could feel that he's still warm. It just seemed to have happened.
On the way to Keady to raise the alarm, they passed a second body. They didn't know it was their cousin, Sean Farmer.
Well, we realise now how lucky we were because there was four in the car we were in, and many a time I think if it hadn't been Colm and Sean that had been shot that night, it could easily have been the four of us.
There were just two more deaths in a year when 206 people were killed in Northern Ireland, including 11 RUC officers and 7 members of the UDR. Like many others, the killings were forgotten by all but their closest family and friends, until the murders of the two GAA fans have been revisited by Judge Henry Barron. He was appointed by the Irish government in October 2000 to conduct an inquiry into the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. He examined all aspects of the attacks, including allegations of collusion between the bombers and British military intelligence. His report was published in December.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, you all should have a copy of the report now. The committee met in private session, as I said, with Mr.
The judge concludes that the bombings were carried out by two groups of loyalist paramilitaries, one based in Belfast and the other around Portadown and Lurgan. He says most, but not all of those involved, were members of the UVF. His report also contains allegations that the shootings on this quiet country road and the Dublin and Monaghan attacks were linked, and that they were carried out by a gang consisting of members of the security forces and the Mid-Ulster UVF. One of the alleged members of the Glenanne gang is this man, Stuart Young. The Barron report contains allegations that he was involved in the Monaghan bombing, which killed 7 people. He denies the allegations. The report quotes a Garda intelligence report written within a year of the bombings, which describes Young as the leader of the UVF in Portadown at the time. He left Northern Ireland in 1977 and now runs a garage in Scotland. Spotlight asked him to take part in this programme, but he declined. So we went to see him. At first, he lied about who he was in answering questions.
Stuart Young?
Stuart Young? That's my dad you're talking to.
I think it's you.
No.
You're not Stuart Young? Do you not own this place?
No, it's
my
my
father
father owns it.
Your father owns it?
What are you looking for?
What age is your father?
He was 65.
What age are you?
What was that to do with?
We believe you're Stuart Young.
No.
The allegations of former police officer John Weir form a central part of the Barron report. He spent 12 years in jail for his part in the murder of a Catholic shopkeeper, William Strathern. He told Judge Barron that the 3 car bombs that killed 26 people in Dublin were assembled at the farm at Glenanne, and that members of the gang carried out other attacks, including the murders at Altnamacken, after the bombings. The farm is owned by James Mitchell, who at the time was a member of the RUC Reserve. An RUC investigation in 1978 concluded that the farm was a major arms dump for the UVF. In his report, Judge Barron says,
"It is likely that the farm of James Mitchell in Glenanne played a significant part in the preparation for the attacks. It is also likely that members of the UDR and RUC either participated in or were aware of those preparations."
Spotlight asked James Mitchell to take part in this programme, but he declined. So we went to ask him about Weir's allegations.
You know nothing about the Dublin Bomb. I didn't know that had in the paper. He says that John Weir's a bloody liar and will be proved a liar.
He says that the group, he calls it the Glenanne group, used to meet here and launch a series of attacks.
The Glenanne group. First a damn lies. It never happened and didn't happen. And yet that in your head state that didn't happen here.
Weir told Judge Barron that this is one of the men who assembled the Dublin car bombs at the farm. He's Lawrence McClure, at the time a member of the RUC Reserve. He's a close friend of James Mitchell and was once a friend of John Weir. When interviewed by the RUC in August 2000, McClure denied the allegations and said he didn't know Weir at the time of the bombings.
I wasn't involved in making the bombs. I know nothing about making bombs. But I would safely say Special Branch up here knows exactly who planted the Dublin bombs and who was involved in it. And eventually it will come out. Hopefully it'll come out soon and then everybody will realise they're making a mistake. At least the ones that's accusing and blaming me.
The Barron report also contains claims from Weir that some members of the Glenanne gang were responsible for killing 3 people at Donnelly's bar in Silverbridge in December 1975. Those killed were Patrick and Michael Donnelly and Trevor Bracknell, an Englishman who'd married a local woman and had gone out to celebrate the birth of their 3rd child.
Claims of responsibility for the attack by a Protestant paramilitary group haven't yet been substantiated, but the lack of warning and heavy casualties fit the grim pattern of sectarian revenge killings.
He'd been in visiting me in the hospital. Our little girl was only a couple of days old, and he said he was calling in at Silverbridge to get his cheque changed and buy drinks for his pals. I had the radio on and I heard there's news now coming in about explosion in South Armagh at Donnelly's at Silverbridge. And it was much later on when the chaplain and the consultant came to tell me. And they said, I believe you're a very brave woman, but you're going to have to be a lot braver. And I said, you don't have to tell me Trevor's killed. I said, that's right.
It may have happened 25 or 30 years ago for someone who wasn't affected by it. But if you've been affected by it, it happens every morning you wake up. It's still there with you. It's there with you all the time.
A further 6 murders carried out on the 4th of January 1976 are also alleged by Weir to have been the work of the gang. At around 6 p.m. that Sunday evening, gunmen shot 3 members of the Reeve family in their home near Whitecross in South Armagh. 20 minutes later, 18 miles away, Barney O'Dowd's wife answered a knock at the door of their home.
Just confronted by these 3 men. Immediately said, this is a hold-up. But the next thing was I was shot in the arm and spun around and I was shot again. And my brother, who was sitting on the couch, a very game man, a very, very game man, he launched himself at the gunman and he was shot, I think, in the head, but I saw him drop straight down. And then I was shot a number of times again. And I struggled to my feet and being shot again. Then all was quiet. When I recovered, I crawled to the doorway and pulled myself up with the handle of the door, and I could see that one of my sons was lying in the hallway dead. And I crept over to his body to see if he was any sense of movement or anything, but it's quite obvious he was dead. My other son had been already shot in the sitting room, but it was around at the back of the door and I didn't see him. It all happened as fast as that.
The killings were part of a spiralling series of tit-for-tat murders. 3 days earlier, 3 Protestants had been killed in an ILA bomb attack on a bar in Guildford. And the day after the Reevy and O'Dowd attacks, the IRA murdered 10 Protestant workmen at King's Mills.
I had to go and identify my 2 nephews, and they were just laying there like dogs. Just laying like dogs. Blood here, everything.
The RUC told the Garda they didn't believe John Weir's allegations. They said his credibility was undermined by his murder conviction and the fact that his evidence in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings was based on hearsay, but the Garda say his claims have been verified. Weir now works in Africa and has refused to be interviewed about his allegations by the police in Northern Ireland. Judge Henry Barron acknowledges that Weir himself has questions to answer and that he may not have told the whole truth about his involvement in terrorism, but he concluded that Weir's evidence overall was credible. Weir also refused to make himself available for a television interview, but we spoke to him by phone.
At this stage, I will certainly not implicate myself in something. You understand what I'm saying? I'm hardly going to say something to you today which would leave me open to maybe prosecution.
Those Weir names as members of the Glenanne gang say he's a liar, an embittered man motivated by a desire to smear the name of the RUC because he was sent to jail. But Spotlight has discovered evidence that appears to bear out his claims. This is William McCaughey. He joined the UVF in 1969 and 2 years later joined the RUC. He's also a former member of the Special Patrol Group in Armagh. Along with Weir, he was convicted of the murder of Catholic shopkeeper William Strathern. He was also convicted of the kidnapping of a Catholic priest. He refused to meet Judge Barron, but did speak to Spotlight. He admits to being in a gang that included members of the security forces and loyalist paramilitaries.
I was quite happy to cooperate at any level with any person who had a basic loyalty to Northern Ireland, who shared the same belief system, the same ideological system as myself.
McCaughey is no friend of John Weir, but his account of his own terrorist activity bears out allegations of the gang's existence.
It depended on the numbers, and it depended on how much a person had been doing. It wouldn't always been the same people, but the same people would always have been central to, if you like, deciding what should be done and what shouldn't be done, always in consultation with the local UVF units. There was horses for courses, obviously. There was people who were drivers. There was people who were able to take people's lives, shoot people. There was people who simply operated at an intelligence level. Not every person involved was actually involved in the taking of life directly.
This man also provides evidence that appears to support Weir's allegations. He's Gary Armstrong, another former RUC sergeant and member of the Armagh Special Patrol Group. He was awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal in 1973. But in 1980, he received a 2-year suspended prison sentence for kidnapping a Catholic priest along with William McCaughey. There are no allegations linking him directly to the Dublin and Monaghan attacks, but John Weir claims Armstrong recruited him into the Glenanne gang. Now a born-again Christian, Armstrong has written an account of his involvement in terrorism. The existence of the book is not widely known, but Spotlight has obtained a copy.
We knew who the terrorists were, and although we would torture them, beat them and intimidate them, we could never convict them. Colleagues were being killed, Protestant neighbours were being killed, and nothing seemed to be having any effect. It was against this background that I decided to cast my lot in with the Protestant terrorist organisation.
When questioned by the police about Weir's allegations in September 2000, Armstrong dismissed them as the malicious, spiteful and money-grabbing exploits of a psychologically unstable person. But in his book, Armstrong refers to himself as the terrorist lawman and describes his association with what he called the force within a force.
Several of my SPG friends felt the same way, and so began a series of terrorist ventures aimed at terrorists that was to go on for many months. During this time, gun and bomb attacks took place. Terrorists were terrorised, and information valuable to terrorist seekers was given. We used our influence, our knowledge and our position to make war on the terrorists.
But the vast majority of the gang's victims were innocent Catholics. Today, Gary Armstrong works as a Christian youth leader. The doorway of his home is inscribed with biblical symbols and quotations, including this one, encouraging callers to knock on the door. But when the Spotlight production team visited Mr. Armstrong to ask for an interview, the door remained closed. So we went to see him about the contents of the Barron report.
What do you think? It was just, I mean, you know that the report names you, and there are a series of allegations about you that you were a member of a gang that carried out a series of attacks on both sides of the border, and we'd be keen to talk to you. Will you sit down with us and tell us the truth?
Spotlight has contacted Gary Armstrong on several occasions. He said he would only meet us on condition that his comments were not recorded, and said he regarded his past as a closed book. In 1980, Gary Armstrong was convicted of the kidnapping of Father Hugh Murphy, an RAF chaplain in County Antrim. Armstrong had been implicated in the kidnapping by William McCaughey, whom police had arrested after a tip-off.
It came out of the blue. Not surprised that after some 6 years involvement in physical force loyalism that I was arrested. But at the time of my arrest, I certainly wasn't anticipating being arrested.
McCaughey broke under questioning and also admitted involvement with John Weir in the murder of Catholic shopkeeper William Strathern. Statements made by William McCaughey and Weir led to the arrests of Mitchell, McClure, Armstrong and a number of other police officers. In his book, Gary Armstrong recalls,
Willie had betrayed me. My friends and police comrades involved with me in various acts of terrorism were also in custody, and soon I was being questioned about other incidents. I cursed Willie and longed for the opportunity to meet him long enough to strangle him.
The police investigation resulted in a trial of several alleged members of the gang. McCaughey, Armstrong, McClure, the man Weir alleges to have built the Dublin bombs, and 2 other RUC officers were charged with an attack on the Rock Bar near Katy, County Armagh in June 1976. A customer had just left the bar when the gunmen arrived and shot him from close range. One of them then planted a tin packed full of gelignite at the door. The attackers then fired through the windows before driving off. Fortunately for those inside, only the bomb's detonator exploded. McCaughey, McClure and another officer were charged with attempted murder at the Rock Bar when they appeared before Lord Chief Justice Sir Robert Lowry at Belfast Crown Court in April 1980. But those charges were later dropped after McCaughey pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm. He claimed that he fired at the customer's legs to incapacitate him, and that explanation was accepted by the judge. The judge described the fact that the bomb didn't explode as an act of providence. He went on to say,
"It is a mercy that the victim who was shot in the legs by William John Alexander McCaughey when coming out of the public house has recovered. These factors allow me to take a more lenient view than I otherwise would have done in the circumstances of this case. This was a very serious offence. I do, however, accept what you have said, and it is clear that the Crown does too by not proceeding with the charge of attempted murder. In other words, you were deliberately aiming at the legs of this man."
This is Michael McGrath, the man William McCaughey shot. But he wasn't shot in the legs, he was shot in the stomach from point-blank range.
He nearly had the gun up against my chest. It was that close. I was shot from here to here. Here in the navel, on down to the bottom of my belly, on each side. On each side. From here to here, and here, and here.
The whole trial hinged on my intent, which I succeeded in persuading the Crown was not an intent to kill. And when that was accepted, then it was automatic in law that other people who played a lesser part wouldn't be prosecuted for attempted murder if the principal antagonist was not being so prosecuted.
The key issue was whether there was an intention to kill Michael McGrath, but the man whose injuries were at the very core of the debate was not called to give evidence.
I knew nothing. I never got to the court.
So you weren't told that the court hearing was being heard that day?
Well, not at all. She was surprised.
And you, would you have been willing to go to court that day to give evidence about what happened?
I went on my hands and knees till I seen the boys.
At the trial, William McCaughey and John Weir were sentenced to life for the murder of Catholic shopkeeper William Strathern. McCaughey was sentenced to 2 years for wounding Michael McGrath. He also received jail terms for causing an explosion and possession of explosives and a firearm. Lawrence McClure admitted causing an explosion. He received a 2-year sentence suspended for 3 years. When Spotlight asked him about the incident, he said the bomb was not intended to explode.
Would it be true to say you were trying to kill people in the bar? So you planted the bomb and you fire guns, but you weren't trying to kill anyone?
Even a bomb, it was a dud bomb.
And were the dud bullets that were fired at McGrath?
I didn't fire them.
But William McCaughey's account of the incident clearly contradicts that claim.
What's your memory of that night? What happened?
Well, it was quite simple. A number of people set out to kill customers in the Rock Bar by gunfire, and then to throw a bomb into the building after the shooting had been carried out. The plan came partly unstuck when access to the bar was blocked.
Gary Armstrong's book also appears to challenge the contention that there was no intention to kill. Charges against him in connection with the Rock Bar attack were dropped, but his book gives the impression that he was there. In a chapter entitled Unfulfilled Potential, he describes being present at the following incident.
Having shot one man, they fled the scene to allow their bomb to go off, causing maximum injury and devastation. The fuse had been lit. The fact is, the bomb failed to go off because only the detonator exploded, not the bomb. The plan had gone wrong and the purpose was thwarted because the bomb failed to explode. Unfulfilled potential.
In his closing summary, in an astonishing reflection of the times, the Lord Chief Justice said those involved in the attack could not be regarded as terrorists.
I must remember that whatever sentence is just, it would follow that it would be imposed on a different and lower scale from that appropriate to terrorists. I recognise that the motives of the accused who took part in that enterprise have already been analysed, and that they spring from a feeling of frustration. That is, when they felt that what I might call as ordinary methods had proved relatively ineffective in dealing with terrorists in County Armagh and adjoining counties.
The Lord Chief Justice was clearly not aware that William McCaughey was a member of the UVF at the time. Nor was he aware that Lawrence McClure had made admissions during questioning linking him to the attack on Donnelly's Bar in Silver Bridge. Neither did he know that Gary Armstrong, who received a suspended sentence for the kidnapping of Father Hugh Murphy, was involved with loyalist terrorists. The man whose farm is alleged in the Barron report to have served as a base for the gang, James Mitchell, was convicted at the trial of possession of weapons and explosives. He was given a 1-year suspended sentence. Judge Henry Barron believes that the police investigation that led to the court case provides firm evidence that much of what John Weir says is true. He examined the records of the questioning of the RUC officers, The original notes have disappeared, but he had access to RUC Special Branch daily record sheets which contained information from the interviews. He concluded,
"What can be said is that in relation to the attacks on Donnelly's Bar, John Farmer and Colin McCartney, the Reevy family and the O'Dowd family, information was given by one or more of the interviewees which confirmed Weir's account of who was responsible in each case."
When Spotlight visited James Mitchell, he denied any knowledge of the weapons found on his farm.
Who owned the weapons?
I don't know. They never told me who owned them.
Who put them there?
I don't know.
But those denials are a complete contradiction of what Judge Barron says Mitchell told the police when he was arrested. According to his report, police records established that
Mitchell knew 10 named loyalists whom he believed were involved in moving arms and explosives to and from his farm. Of those 10, 6 appear in Weir's statement, accused of participating in one or more of the attacks listed. The investigation, in fact, established that his farm was a major arms dump for the UVF.
James Mitchell wasn't the only person to make admissions. The Barron report states that Lawrence McClure made admissions connected to the attack on Donnelly's Bar. He told detectives that he and a woman had met 3 people close to the scene of the attack and driven them away, although he denies knowing that they had attacked the bar. One of the men he met was Robert McConnell, a member of the UDR who was murdered by the IRA in April 1976. McConnell was also a close associate of this man, Robin Jackson, nicknamed the Jackal. Jackson is regarded as having been the most prolific Loyalist killer in the history of the Troubles. John Weir claims Jackson and McConnell were members of the Glenanne gang.
On the night of the attack on Donnelly's Bar, Silver Bridge, why did you meet Robert McConnell that night and others and drive them?
What? Was to reckon any load.
Why did you meet them?
I was asked to meet them.
Were you a getaway driver then?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. I was just asked to pick men up.
Lawrence McClure and the woman were charged with withholding information, but the charges were later dropped. Spotlight has learned that some members of the Glenanne gang planned a major atrocity that was not carried out. It was to be a revenge attack for the IRA murders of 10 Protestant workmen at King's Mills. The target was to be a Catholic primary school or a convent in Newry.
Well, the intention would have been to kill the occupants of the building, quite simply. It would have been, well, nuns and whoever else happened to be there. It would have been a case of maiden Republican terror with greater Loyalist terror. That would have been the rationale behind it. Pretty sectarian, pretty extreme stuff, but the murder of 10 innocent working-class Protestants was pretty sectarian, pretty horrific.
The plans were aborted because of fears of the possible IRA response.
I think people were so sick of death and sick of killing that their ability to stomach any more killing, especially in their name, had, for the time being at that time anyhow, ran out. The support wasn't there on the ground.
John Weir told Judge Barron that the activities of the Glenanne gang were known long before the 1980 court case.
I was in the operations room many a time in Newry, and I even forget the man's name who was in the operations room, but he was telling me many a time and used to show me the list of cars that came to the house and went from the house and all the rest, because the special branch used to ask him to do a check on these cars.
The suggestion that the security forces knew about the farm appears to be confirmed by police records made available to Judge Barron. They reveal that RUC intelligence in January 1976 suggested that the UVF was using a farm convenient to the border.
For anybody at all to know how things operate in any force, it is laughable to suggest that such things could go on without people knowing all about it.
Weir's claims are further supported by this man, Colin Wallace, who also gave evidence to the Barron inquiry. Wallace was stationed at the British Army's headquarters in Lisburn between 1968 and 1975 and worked for a covert unit engaged in black propaganda. As part of his work, he had access to daily intelligence reports and worked with MI6 and MI5. Wallace claims the security forces were well aware of the Glenanne farm.
We certainly knew it was a meeting point for loyalist paramilitaries in that area. And we had quite a lot of information about people who came and went.
Wallace has many critics. Having been dismissed from the army and convicted of manslaughter, he's been branded a professional liar. But his manslaughter conviction has been quashed and his dismissal found to be unjust. Judge Barron concluded that he was a credible witness. On the 14th of August 1975, a month after being removed from Northern Ireland, Wallace claims to have written to a former colleague naming some of those believed to have been involved in the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. Those he referred to included Stuart Young, Robin Jackson and Robert McConnell. Wallace alleged they were working with Special Branch and military intelligence.
There was sufficient evidence at any time to have brought them in, at least for questioning. And particularly those people who were identified as being involved in the Dublin Monaghan bombings seems to me absolutely incredible, bearing in mind the magnitude of the loss of life at that stage, that there weren't arrests just to enable questioning to take place.
A former senior RUC officer based in County Armagh in the 1970s says the security forces were aware that some members of the RUC and UDR were working with loyalists. The Spotlight production team traced the officer. He didn't want to appear on camera, but did meet us. He rejected John Weir's allegations that the activities of the gang were condoned by the intelligence services, but he believes lives could have been saved if information had not been withheld.
The Special Branch and the Army were not giving us what they should have been giving us, definitely not. A team is at its strongest when it pulls together, and I've been disappointed in some of the murders I've investigated over the years in not getting the cooperation, not getting the information I knew they had. I mean, it was obstruction by omission, by not telling you things.
The police officer said different permutations of the group were believed to have been involved in a number of murders. These included Altnamacken, Donnelly's Bar and the Reevy and O'Dowd families. This scenario of members of the same gang carrying out a series of attacks, as Weir told Judge Barron, is supported by details of the guns used.
The only weapons that I ever had access to or actually used were weapons which belonged to and were under the control of the Ulster Volunteer Force.
Ballistic records made available to the Barron inquiry reveal that a 9mm Sterling submachine gun used in the attack on Donnelly's Bar in Silverbridge was also used in the attack on the Reevy family. A 9mm Luger pistol used in the shootings of Sean Farmer and Colin McCartney at Altnamacken was also used in the attack on the Reevy family and the Rock Bar. A Webley revolver used in the attack on the Reevys was used in the killings at Altnamacken, and a Sterling submachine gun used in the attack on the Reevys was also used at the Rock Bar. Judge Henry Barron was critical of elements of the RUC investigation leading to the 1980 trial. While McCaughey and Weir were convicted of the murder of Catholic shopkeeper William Strathern, both told the police that Robin Jackson had pulled the trigger, but he wasn't even questioned. Judge Barron says he finds this indicative of the RUC's approach to the whole investigation.
The only persons prosecuted were those who had made admissions, and they were only prosecuted in relation to those crimes for which they had made admissions. Little or no effort was made to obtain further evidence which might support charges against those who had not confessed.
Those alleged in the report to have been members of the Glenanne gang are not prepared to comment publicly.
At the end of the day, the book's there for all. Anybody to read? The time is convenient, we'll get together, I'm sure. Okay.
The only thing that I was involved in, as far as I'm concerned, is what I was convicted of.
And don't go back. You'll come back to the not to me anymore.
You know the Barron report named you 27 times. What are you going to say about that? No. You know
Well, I'd like to talk to you about the Barron report and the Dublin Monaghan bombings.
Would you like to tell your side of the story?
They're very serious allegations with you, Mr.
Why won't you tell the relatives the truth?
Had nothing whatsoever to do with it.
Well, why don't you tell your story? Why don't you tell it? Why don't you tell your story?
Mr. Young, the Barron report has made very serious allegations. We just want to hear your response. Are you understand all, Mr. Young?
Mr. Young.
Mr. Young. Mr. Young. Mr. Young. Mr. Young.
The Barron report concluded that while there were grounds for suspecting that the Dublin and Monaghan bombers may have had assistance from individual members of the security forces, there was no evidence to prove institutional collusion. But it went on to say that the inquiry had been hampered by the refusal of the British government to release information.
Correspondence with the Northern Ireland Office undoubtedly produced some useful information, but its value was reduced by the reluctance to make original documents available and the refusal to supply other information on security grounds. It must be said that the scope of this report is limited as a result.
The relatives of those killed in the Dublin and Monaghan bombings have called for a public inquiry to be held in Northern Ireland. Relatives of those killed in attacks attributed to the Glenanne gang say the full truth will not be known until the British government makes all relevant information available. Alan Bracknell is one of those demanding answers. His father Trevor was killed at Donnelly's Bar in Silverbridge in December 1975. He now works with the Pat Finucane Centre in Derry. The centre presented evidence to the Barron inquiry on behalf of those who believe that their relatives were victims of the Glenanne gang.
I'm not doing this out of any vindictiveness. I just want to know what happened. There's no one wants to see anyone prosecuted at this stage. What we want to know is the truth of what happened.
The hurt of the actual shooting and all, it's bad enough, but it's so much worse that as law-abiding families were subjected to what happened to us and other families too, as well as ours, by the supposedly forces of law and order.
My father was an Englishman who came to live here. Surely, I'm not saying that makes it a more special case, but what I'm saying is his government should be able to tell us, his family, what actually happened to him and why people weren't prosecuted. I shouldn't have to be asking these questions. I should know the answers to them at this stage 30 years later.
Judge Barron hasn't finished his search for answers. He's now conducting inquiries into other incidents, including the bombing of Kay's Tavern in Dundalk. On the same night, 3 people were killed at Donnelly's Bar in Silverbridge. Those inquiries will include examining allegations that the incidents were linked to the farm at Glenanne.